city of Ravenshade was ordinary in many ways. A quiet town with brick-lined streets, friendly faces during the day, and a comforting routine that lulled its people into a sense of normalcy. But as the clock in the town square struck midnight, a deep, suffocating darkness swallowed everything. Every night, without fail, the power shut down. Every street light, every neon sign, every glowing window extinguished in an instant, as if the city had never been alive at all. The residents of Ravenshade knew what to do. They locked their doors, pulled their curtains tight, and never under any circumstances stepped outside after midnight. This ritual was not a superstition, it was survival. The origins of the blackout were unknown. The power company had no record of outages, and the electric grid was said to be fully functional. Yet, every single night, darkness reigned. There were whispers, of course. The older folk spoke in hushed tones, saying it had been this way for generations. The young ones who had grown up in Ravenshade never questioned it. They knew better. Nobody ever saw what lurked in the midnight abyss. Nobody wanted to. The only proof that something was there came in the mornings. Occasionally, faint handprints would be found smeared against the fogged-up windows, long and pale as if belonging to something not quite human. Sometimes a pet would be missing. No tracks, no blood, just an eerie silence in its place. And rarely, very rarely, someone would forget to lock their door. Those houses remained empty the next day. The people never spoke of them again. Despite the city's unnatural secret, life carried on. The citizens accepted their fate, adapted, and most importantly, obeyed the unspoken rule: stay inside when the darkness comes. Then came Ethan Cole. Ethan wasn't a local. He had moved to Ravenshade only 6 months ago, drawn by the promise of a peaceful life away from the chaos of the big city. He was an outsider, someone who had not grown up fearing the midnight blackout. To him, it was an eerie curiosity, an unsolved mystery begging for answers. And Ethan loved mysteries. At first, he followed the rules like everyone else. He latched his doors, stayed behind drawn curtains, and lay awake in the suffocating silence, wondering what lay beyond his walls. But the more he obeyed, the more his curiosity gnawed at him. Why did the power vanish at the exact stroke of midnight? Why did no one investigate? What happened to the people who didn't lock their doors? He had asked his neighbors once, but they had only stared at him with wide, fearful eyes. One had even grabbed his wrist with trembling fingers and whispered, "Don't ever ask that again." That was when Ethan knew he needed to find out the truth for himself. And so, on the eve of his 6th month in Ravenshade, he made his decision. He would stay outside. He would witness what lurked in the darkness, and he would learn why no one ever spoke of what happened at midnight. Ethan spent the entire day preparing. He tested his flashlight, fully charged. He packed a small backpack with supplies, a camera, a knife for comfort rather than utility, and a notebook to record what he saw. As evening fell, the streets began to empty. Shops closed early, families hurried home, and a heavy tension settled over the town like a thick fog. By 11:30 p.m., the city was a ghost town. The only signs of life were the faint flickers of television screens behind drawn curtains, the whispers of families murmuring their nightly prayers for protection. Ethan stood at his window, watching the last remnants of the city's life flicker out. 11:55 p.m. A distant church bell rang, the sound hollow and foreboding. 11:58 p.m. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He tightened his grip on his flashlight, stepping toward his front door. He could feel the air in his house growing heavier, as if the walls themselves were warning him to stay. 11:59 p.m. He turned the doorknob. 12 a.m. The power cut out. Everything fell into absolute, impenetrable blackness. A silence deeper than anything Ethan had ever experienced filled the world. Not a single cricket chirped, not a single dog barked. The entire city had become a vacuum of sound, a realm where nothing breathed, nothing lived. Ethan stepped outside. The darkness was thicker than he had anticipated. His flashlight flickered on, but its beam seemed almost swallowed by the void. The houses around him were silent, lifeless. He could barely make out their shapes, as though they had been erased from existence. He took a step forward, then another. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just the cold night air. It was the sensation of something watching him. And then the first whisper came. Software. Faint. Almost like the wind. Except there was no wind. A breathy sigh, just inches from his ear. His pulse pounded. He swung the flashlight toward the sound. But there was nothing. Just the darkness, stretching endlessly. Then he heard another whisper, this time from the opposite direction. A soft rustling, like fingers brushing against fabric. Ethan turned sharply, his heart slamming against his ribs. Again, nothing. A prickling sensation crawled up his arms. Something was out here with him. Something he couldn't see. He swallowed, gripping his flashlight tighter. He took another step forward, deeper into the empty street. His footfalls sounded too loud, as if they didn't belong in this unnatural stillness. Then, the first touch, a cold, feather-light caress across his forearm. Ethan recoiled violently, his breath catching in his throat. He swept the flashlight around him, but all he saw was the empty night. Then another touch, this time on his back. His knees locked. His fingers trembled around the flashlight. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to lock himself inside like the others. But it was too late. He had already stepped into their domain, and they had noticed him. Ethan stood frozen in the pitch-black abyss of Ravenshade's midnight. The air was heavy, suffocating, as though the night itself was pressing against him. The touch had been unmistakable, soft, deliberate. Something was out here with him. His flashlight trembled in his grip as he swept its beam across the empty street. But the light barely cut through the darkness. It was as if the blackness had taken on a tangible form, swallowing illumination whole. The houses around him had lost their details, reduced to vague, looming silhouettes. Then he heard it, a whisper, not from one place, but from everywhere. A chorus of breathy, unintelligible murmurs surrounded him, low and slithering, almost like words but without meaning. His breath quickened, forming clouds of mist in the unnaturally cold air. He turned sharply, spinning in a slow, panicked circle, his flashlight darting wildly. But there was nothing except the whispers and the feeling of being watched. His instincts screamed at him to run, to bolt back inside, slam the door, and never, ever break Ravenshade's rule again. But it was too late for that. He had crossed a threshold, stepped into something ancient and unseen. And now, they knew he was here. A sudden gust of wind rushed past him, chilling his skin. But it was wrong. Not the natural push of moving air, but something deliberate, something with intent. He swore he felt fingers brushing against his face, thin and icy. The whispers grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. as if whatever was speaking was getting closer. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his heart hammering. He forced himself forward, deeper into the night. He had come out here for answers, and now there was no turning back. Ethan moved cautiously through the street, each footstep echoing in the oppressive silence. The town, once familiar, now felt alien, as if it had been swallowed by a void, leaving only a shell of its former self. His flashlight flickered, just for a second, a brief stutter in its glow, but enough to send ice-cold terror through his veins. Then came the sound, a wet, shuffling scrape. Close. He whipped around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing was there, just the empty road stretching behind him. And yet, another sound, software, a slow, deliberate dragging against the pavement. His breath caught in his throat. He turned again, light trembling as it swept across the street. The darkness remained unbroken, the world silent. Then, movement, at the very edge of his vision, a flicker of something shifting just beyond the reach of his flashlight, a shape indistinct and unnatural. Ethan's blood ran cold. His mind screamed at him to run, to turn back, to abandon his foolish quest before it was too late. But another part of him, the part that had driven him to step outside in the first place, refused. He had to know. A low creak echoed through the darkness. A door. Somewhere nearby, one of the houses had opened. Ethan turned toward the sound, his light landing on a house a few doors down. Its front door hung slightly ajar, rocking ever so gently, as if someone or something had just stepped inside. His pulse pounded. Hadn't every house been locked? Hadn't the people of Ravenshade sealed themselves in? Then, who had opened that door? Or worse, what had gone inside? For a moment he debated whether to move closer. Then something stepped out. A figure, wrong in ways he couldn't explain. Tall, slender, too slender. It moved in jerking, unnatural twitches, as though its limbs were being pulled by invisible strings. Ethan sucked in a sharp breath, his chest tightening. He instinctively lifted his flashlight, the beam landing directly on the figure. Nothing. The space where it had stood was empty. His heart stuttered. He was sure, absolutely sure, he had seen something there. But now, only the whispering remained. Software. Insistent. Hungry. Then, a sharp, cold breath against his neck. He spun, light swinging wildly. Again, nothing. Panic surged in his veins. He started backing away, his feet unsteady, his mind scrambling to make sense of the impossible. Another whisper. Closer now. Then he felt them. Touches. Faint at first, like strands of spider silk, brushing his arms. Then firmer. Grasping. Hands. Cold, unseen hands, curling around his wrists. He gasped, jerking away, his flashlight tumbling from his grip. The light hit the ground, its beam rolling in slow, lazy arcs across the pavement. His breath came in ragged bursts as he clawed at his arms, trying to shake off the unseen grips. And then he saw them. In the brief, sweeping glow of his fallen flashlight, shadows flickered along the pavement. But they weren't his. Elongated, shifting things, stretching and curling like smoke made solid. And they were moving toward him. He staggered back, tripping over his own feet. His head struck the ground, and for a moment, the world blurred. Then, they were on him. The shadows closed in, their whispers rising into a frantic, feverish hum. His body went numb as the hands, so many hands, grasped him, pulled at him, dragged him downward. A terrible cold seeped into his skin, deeper than flesh, deeper than bone. Ethan gasped, but no sound came out. The darkness was swallowing him whole. The last thing he saw was his flashlight, its beam flickering weakly. Then, nothing. Only darkness. Only silence. Only the whispering of the night. Ethan was no longer in Ravenshade. Or perhaps he was. But he was no longer himself. He had become part of something else. Something that watched, something that whispered. And when the power returned at dawn, Ravenshade awoke to its usual peaceful morning. But Ethan Cole's house remained empty. His door stood ajar, and his shadow was nowhere to be found. This builds up the horror, with Ethan experiencing the creeping, inescapable terror of the midnight blackout. The denouement will seal his fate, where he realizes that he has become one of them. Let me know if you need any changes or adjustments. There was no light, no air, no sound. Ethan floated in darkness, not the kind found in unlit rooms or moonless nights, but something deeper, a void that swallowed even the concept of light itself. It clung to him like a second skin, pressing against his chest, filling his lungs. He couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed. The darkness was absolute. And then the whispers returned, but this time he understood them, not as words, but as something deeper, something ancient. They weren't voices at all. They were thoughts merging and shifting, pressing into his mind like cold fingertips against his skull. They were calling him, welcoming him, changing him. Ethan tried to move, but his body no longer obeyed. His limbs, were they still limbs, felt wrong. His skin, his bones, his very sense of self were unraveling. The darkness wasn't just around him. It was inside him now, coursing through his veins, seeping into the spaces between his thoughts. You are home. The words weren't spoken. They weren't heard. They simply were, as if they had always been there, waiting for him to understand. A memory surfaced. Ravenshade, the midnight blackout, the flashlight, the cold, grasping hands. Had that really happened? Or had Ethan always been here? His thoughts scattered like dying embers. He could no longer recall the shape of his own face, the sound of his voice. His past, his name, were slipping through his fingers like sand. Number no, I'm real. I'm Ethan Cole. I moved to Ravenshade 6 months ago. I had a house. I had a life. A surge of whispers swallowed the thought, consuming it before it could take form. Identity was meaningless here. Ethan's fear dimmed, replaced by something else. Something new. Or maybe something old. Something that had always been part of him, waiting for him to return. His body, or what was left of it, began to shift. He could feel himself stretching, unraveling into the darkness, becoming one with it. His skin dissolved into shadow. His breath melted into the whispering chorus. And for the first time, he understood what the people of Ravenshade had always feared. They weren't afraid of the dark. They were afraid of what the dark could take from them, what it could turn them into. Time had no meaning here. Maybe an instant had passed, maybe an eternity. But then, the light returned. The blackness shuddered. It recoiled, hissing, as thin slivers of pale dawn sliced through it. Ethan felt it, not as relief, not as salvation, but as something else. Pain. The light burned. It wasn't just illumination. It was an intrusion, a violation of the formless world he had become part of. His very existence recoiled from it, writhing, twisting away. And then, suddenly, he was somewhere else. The town of Ravenshade materialized around him in a blur of shapes and color, unreal and distant. The streets were the same, the houses unchanged, the early morning still as peaceful as ever. But Ethan was not the same. He could see himself, or rather the absence of himself, Where his body should have been, there was only shadow, a flickering, shifting form, a blur at the edges, a thing not meant to be seen in daylight. He had no reflection, he had no substance, only a faint outline, a ripple in the air, a presence where something human used to be. Ethan wanted to scream, but shadows don't have voices. They only whisper. The city began to wake. Windows creaked open, doors unlocked. Children stepped onto porches, stretching in the morning sun. And no one noticed. No one looked at the empty house on the corner, its door still ajar. No one asked where Ethan Cole had gone. It was as if he had never existed at all. This was Ravenshade's unspoken truth. The people who vanished were not mourned. They were erased. The town did not speak of them, did not acknowledge them, because they were still here, watching, waiting. Ethan felt himself moving, not walking, not stepping, but simply drifting with the shadows, curling through the streets, slipping under doorways, brushing against the living without ever being seen. He wasn't alone. The others were here too. Dozens, hundreds, a countless number of silent figures without form, roaming the town, unseen but ever present. This is what happens to those who stay outside. They did not die. They became the night. And now, Ethan was one of them. The day passed in an agonizing blur of light, each second an eternity of searing awareness. The shadows could not move freely under the sun. They lingered in corners, in doorways, trapped in places the light did not reach. But as evening fell, Ethan stirred. His body, now a shifting wisp of darkness, began to stretch again, regaining its strength. And as the first stars pricked through the sky, he felt something new. Hunger. Not for food, not for water, for something else. Something warm, something alive, something that had been taken from him. The people of Ravenshade had stolen it, kept it from him, hid behind their walls, behind their locks, while the darkness gnawed at the edges of their fragile world. And Ethan understood. This was why the whispers never ceased. This was why the shadows moved, because they wanted it back. Because they were jealous of the living. And so, as the clock in the town square struck midnight, Ethan drifted toward the nearest house. His house. The one that had belonged to him. Inside, the lights were off. The door was locked. But Ethan was no longer bound by such things. He seeped through the cracks, his presence sliding over the floorboards like a creeping fog. The walls felt different now, alien, as though they had never been his at all. And then he saw her, a woman, a stranger, sleeping in what had once been his bedroom. The town had already moved on, already replaced him. She stirred slightly as if sensing something in the air. The hairs on her arms stood on end, a shiver rippling through her body. She didn't know why. But Ethan did. He reached toward her, not with hands, not with fingers, but with something darker, something colder, something hungry. She shivered again. Then, her breath hitched, a soundless gasp, a faint, unconscious tremor. She could feel him, not as a presence, not as a form, but as a whisper against her skin, the same way he had felt them that night. The same way all the lost ones had felt before they became part of the night. The whispering grew, the air thickened, the darkness stirred, and Ethan knew. Soon she would understand, too. The sun rose again, and Ravenshade continued as it always had. The morning air was still. The town square bustled with quiet, ordinary life. And if by chance a resident awoke with the strange, lingering sensation that something had touched them in the night, they would simply pull the covers tighter, They would lock their doors more carefully, and they would never speak of it, because in Ravenshade everyone knew the truth. The night never forgets those who step into it, and once it has touched you, it will never let you go.